In 2018, Will Toledo, indie child prodigy and frontman of lo-fi pitchfork darlings Car Seat Headrest, did something that not a lot of artists would be very open to doing. He re-recorded, remastered, and reissued an album in his already lengthy catalog that was released almost 9 years prior. Car Seat Headrest was just coming off the heels of their major label efforts Teens of Style and Teens of Denial, which both had reached widespread critical acclaim and garnered favorable reviews from Pitchfork and Rolling Stone. So when Toledo and the band decided to re-record the 2011 fan favorite record Twin Fantasy, they certainly raised a few eyebrows. People wondered why they would bother revisiting a record that was nearly a decade old. But if you listen to the original version, otherwise known as the mirror-to-mirror version, as opposed to the newer version known as the face-to-face version, it becomes incredibly clear that Will had to remake this album. It was simply too ambitious for the limited resources he had at the time, and when you listen to the reissued version, the instrumentation, the production, and the reworked lyrics sound so much fuller, much more complete than they previously did on the original. Just listen to this. And now compare it to this. Back in 2011, it was just Will and his computer. By 2018, he had a full backing band, a major label budget, and a much more advanced set of tools in his arsenal. And I think we're all grateful that he did take advantage of this opportunity. Because while the fan base can go on and on and on debating which version of Twin Fantasy is better, there's no disputing the fact that this was a massive breakthrough moment for the band. If Teens of Denial had made them a fierce contender for one of the most important indie bands of the last decade, then Twin Fantasy had only solidified it. And today we're going to be breaking down one of the biggest highlights on the album, which is the almost 15-minute long track. Y'all really wanted me to pick the longest song, huh? Beach Life and Death. So, 13 minutes and 18 seconds. Now you might ask, how on earth does a band achieve that lengthy a song without boring the listener to death? Well, it's simple, really. The trick is to always keep the listener on their toes throughout the entire duration of the song. If it's nothing but the simple verse-chorus structure over and over again, then there's really nothing to anticipate, and the song just becomes a massive slog through the mud. And this is anything but an orthodox song. What makes Beach Life and Death so great is that there are so many different peaks and valleys, and it is written in a manner that feels cohesive and complete, yet also sounds like several different symphonies and ballads within a song. Perhaps the most on-the-nose example of this type of writing is Bohemian Rhapsody. It has all the complex arrangements of a classical symphony and an operatic choir, but at the core, it's still a giant stadium rock anthem with great writing. That's a balance that is very difficult to achieve, and one of the many ways that this is achieved is through very skilled narration. Will Tostito. Bill Tortilla, there we go.
Electric chair.
He was a literary major, so he knows a thing or two about the art of storytelling. The entirety of Beach Life and Death is written in the second person. The narrator is addressing somebody else directly. They appear to be addressing a former lover, but they are also addressing the listener, which is the sign of a very conscious and generous songwriter. Will is allowing the listener to tap into their own experiences related to the subject matter that he's singing about, which makes the listening experience all the more immersive. It is also a very confessional song that reads like a diary entry. People gravitate to Will Toledo's specific strain of confessional songwriting because it's unstable, sporadic, and unreliable, just like our brains. The narrator of Beach Life and Death overshares to a point where it almost gets uncomfortable, but it also feels extremely affirming for listeners who experience the same sort of disillusionment, with lines like, "What should I do? Eat breakfast. What should I do? Eat lunch." The narrator exhibits just how little control individuals really have over their life circumstances. There really isn't anything we can do to change our current situation, other than drag on with our day-to-day lives. The song also debunks several myths about depression, especially the idea that people who are depressed are just plagued by sadness all the time. For instance, in the lyrics, Will paints an excellent picture of how depression feels to those who actually suffer from it. Rather than simply feeling too much, the worst parts can be the moments where you just feel completely empty, and just how mind-numbing that can feel. Will's skilled ability to subvert expectations is on full display throughout the song. There are several instrumental build-ups and drawbacks, and just when the listener thinks they have the direction of the song figured out, Will and the band immediately pull the rug out from underneath them and thwart their expectations yet again. The minute the song begins to pick up speed, it will eventually slow down altogether, or make another sharp left turn. Another way that the song toys with expectations is with the lyrics. Several lines are cloaked in both irony and sincerity. A perfect example of this juxtaposition is in the line, the theme resurfaces again on the line, Will is illustrating himself and his lover's desire to escape the cruel and dull grip of humanity, while simultaneously yearning to feel human themselves, to feel loved and understood in a society where they are made to feel like outsiders. The song at large also explores the concept of self-destruction and self-erasure as an act of love. On the line, the narrator is so invested in another individual that it's gotten to a point where it's become exhausting and unhealthy. The narrator has essentially deluded themselves into thinking that they are protecting this person that they claim to love, when in reality, they are only hurting them, and by default, hurting themselves. A standout moment in the song is in the build-up to the final climax. Will invokes a verse from the Thessalonians in the New Testament, which essentially warns that those who engage in sexual activity will be punished for their so-called impure transgressions. Getting biblical may seem odd at first listen, but it also feels like the narrator is trying to grapple with their own internalized shame. And not just queer shame, but the type of shame that any kid who was raised in a puritanical American household will inevitably internalize after having nothing but Bible verses about sin regurgitated to them every week. I'm not sure if this was just poetic license, or if Will genuinely grew up experiencing the symptoms of being raised in the church. But it ultimately speaks to a fundamental truth that is experienced by a legion of kids across the country. Will then transitions into unpacking the phases of these people's lives where they eventually become adults and are forced to come face to face with the fact that their fundamental ideas of life are not exactly the sparkling pixie dust fantasy that is fed to them in the media they consume, specifically Disney films, which are packed to the brim with a false utopian messaging about love, magic, and happily ever after, and as a result, they grow up disillusioned, depressed, and unprepared for the complicated hardships that life throws at them. The song eventually transitions into these repeated couplets that use the idea of literally opening up somebody's grave as an allegory for these feelings that continue to plague the narrator again and again. In an interview, Will claimed that the lyrics were made to harken back to his third album, which also mentions the idea of death happening at a beach with songs like Beach Death and Beach Funeral. Speaking on the line, "The ocean washed over your grave," Toledo said, "I think it indicated something about mortality and life changes. I was reading a lot of romantic poetry at the time, which uses a lot of natural imagery to convey emotional states. Often there is a sense of dread or incomprehension attached to it, things beyond human understanding. So it's an image that speaks in some way, but I don't know exactly what it means." One of the specific 18th century poets that he was likely referring to in this comment is Samuel Taylor Coleridge and his long-form poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which has a character named Life in Death, who appears to curse the mariner for his sins, which clearly ties back to the verse of the song where Toledo invokes the ancients and the biblical correlation between sexuality and immorality. Will has never said himself that this specific poem did influence the song directly, but with the phrase life and death appearing in the title, and the song having several references to the very same subject matter touched on in the Coleridge poem, it feels a little too on the nose to be just a coincidence. Overall, the song is a sprawling, introspective, symphonic mess that sees the narrator grappling with unrequited love, existential angst, and heartbreak, which is only enhanced by Will's gravelly vocals against Ethan Ives' screeching guitar and Andrew Katz's idiosyncratic drumming. The overdubs and the extremely layered instrumentation that the other members of the backing band, including members of the band Naked Giants who supported Car Seat Headrest on a tour at one point, transformed the song into a massive statement in all its grandeur. It's the highlight of the entire album, and yet it somehow doesn't outshine the rest of the track list. And I don't know how the hell he pulled this off, but it works.